There is something you have been walking around for a long time now, not avoiding, exactly, more like circling, coming close, then finding a reason to step back. You recognize this, the shadow work that belongs to you specifically, the kind Jung said most people with your perceptual sensitivity refuse to enter, is not the work you imagine it to be. It is not about darkness in the abstract. It is about the darkness you have already decided is not yours. You thought the shadow was something other people carried. That is where the cost begins. There is a particular quality to the avoidance that happens in people who feel everything. It is not the avoidance of someone who is numb or careless or simply distracted. It is a highly organized avoidance, sophisticated, dressed in the language of care. The person who avoids their shadow work while remaining fluent in psychological concepts is not avoiding out of ignorance. They are avoiding out of something far more protected, the belief that sensitivity itself is a kind of moral cleanliness, that to feel deeply is to be, by some logic, no one ever quite examines, beyond reproach, and the shadow knows this. It settles in precisely there, in the one place you are most certain you have already looked. I observed this pattern again and again in my clinical work, and I want to be precise about it with you now, because imprecision here is itself a form of avoidance. The person with heightened emotional perception, the one who senses the mood of a room before anyone has spoken, who absorbs the unspoken grief of others as if through skin, this person develops a very early and very convincing explanation for their own discomfort. The explanation goes like this: I feel this way because of what others are doing to me. I am the receiver. I am the one who was not protected. I am the one who carries what no one else would carry. And this explanation is not entirely wrong. That is what makes it so effective as a hiding place. There is real wound behind it, real history, real rooms in childhood where you were the only one paying attention, the only one who noticed the fracture in the voice, the tension that preceded the argument, the silence that followed what was never said. You were alert in that way because alertness kept something safe, kept you safe, kept others legible, kept the environment from collapsing into something worse than what you could already feel coming. That kind of alertness does not simply end when the environment changes. It becomes structure, it becomes identity, it becomes the lens through which you understand yourself as a particular kind of person, someone who feels more, sees more, carries more, and in carrying that identity, you find something that functions as protection without ever announcing itself as such. The shadow settles into that protection and waits. Now, what specifically does it wait inside? What is the shadow work you have been walking around? Because I am not speaking generally now. And I want you to stop for a moment and let the specificity of this arrive. The shadow for someone with your perceptual profile is not the darkness you have acknowledged. It is not the grief you have wept, the anger you have finally named, the wound you have finally let yourself speak aloud. All of that work, and I do not diminish it, is the work of making the known wound bearable. But the shadow is not the known wound. The shadow is the part of you that you have organized your entire identity around not being, for someone who has built their sense of self around feeling around sensitivity, around emotional availability and perception. The shadow is almost always some form of coldness, some form of withholding, some form of aggression, or contempt, or the wish to simply not care. Stay with that, not the anger you have justified. I am angry because of what was done to me, but the anger that has no clean origin story, the contempt that rises in you sometimes when someone needs something from you, and you feel, for one unguarded moment, not compassion, but annoyance, not the deep wish to help, but a quieter, harder wish that they would stop, that they would find someone else, that you could, just once, not be the one who is capable of this. You have pushed that moment away very quickly. Every time I wrote of this elsewhere, in essence, that the qualities we most reject in ourselves are the ones with the most energy in them. That energy is not evidence of corruption. It is not proof that you are secretly the thing you most feared. It is the energy of a part of you that has been denied function, denied even the right to exist for so long that it has become pressurized. It wants to move. It wants to do something in the world, and the only times it gets through are the ones you cannot quite forgive yourself for. The sharp word at the wrong moment, the sudden distance that surprised even you, the feeling when someone described their pain, that you were watching from somewhere very far away and could not make yourself come closer. The moment you realized you resented the person you loved most, not for anything specific, but for needing you at all, those are not failures. They are not evidence that your sensitivity was always a lie. They are the shadow finding the only exits available to it. And here is what the avoidance costs you specifically and concretely, not in some abstract spiritual economy, but in the actual texture of your daily psychological life. When the shadow cannot be integrated, when you cannot bear to look at your own withholding, your own contempt, your own wish to not be needed, it does not disappear, it is displaced, it moves out of you and lands with extraordinary precision on the people around you. You begin to see in them exactly what you cannot see in yourself. You notice their coldness, their selfishness, their failure to show up emotionally, their unwillingness to do the hard relational work, and you feel something that functions as righteous clarity. I can see this about them clearly because I am not like this, and that clarity is the shadow in full operation. This is what I called projection, and it is not a flaw in the person who experiences it. It is a function, it is the psyche's way of allowing the unwanted material to exist somewhere, even if that somewhere has been evacuated from the self. But the cost is this: you now live in a world where others are repeatedly, mysteriously, structured in the same way, the same coldness, the same unavailability, the same failure to truly feel. You are surrounded somehow, always, by people who cannot do the emotional work, and you do not notice that this structure does not change regardless of the individuals involved, because the structure is not coming from them, it is coming from you, not from malice, not from failure, from the precise location in the psyche where the unintegrated shadow produces the world it needs to confirm its own exile. This is what it costs you to keep avoiding it. not a vague spiritual poverty, something far more specific, a life organized around a wound you believe you understand, while the actual wound, the one with your name on it, the one that belongs specifically to you, remains just outside the room you have agreed to live in. There is a particular dream I want you to sit with, not as metaphor, but as psychological fact. You are in a house you know well. You have been in every room. You know the hallway, the light through the windows, the sound the floor makes. And yet there is one door you have passed many times, and you have never once tried to open it. Not because you forgot it was there, because some part of you decided, very early and very quietly, that what is behind it is not yours to look at. That decision was not cowardice, it was survival. But survival conditions change, and the door is still there. What is behind it is not the monster you imagined. It is not the proof of your worst fears about yourself. What is behind it is the part of you that does not want to feel everything, the part of you that is tired, the part that has, underneath the sensitivity, underneath the perception, underneath the long history of being the one who notices a hardness, a refusal, a self that would, given the chance, choose its own rest over someone else's need. That self is not your enemy. That self is what has been trying to reach you for years, through every moment of resentment, every flash of contempt, every inexplicable distance you felt and immediately apologized for. And the shadow work Jung said most people with your perceptual architecture avoid is exactly this, not the integration of some dramatic darkness, not the acknowledgement of violence or depravity, but the quiet, almost unbearably ordinary recognition that you contain the very things you have spent your life perceiving in others, that your sensitivity did not exempt you, that your wound did not make you whole, that the part of you which cannot tolerate coldness in others is, in some precise and uncomfortable way, the part of you that needs to learn what your own coldness is. For the question is not whether you have the shadow, you already know you do. The question, the one that has been sitting just beneath the surface of every conversation you have had about this work, is why you specifically, with your specific perceptual equipment, keep finding ways to be thorough about everything except this. And the answer is not laziness. It is not fear in the ordinary sense. It is something more structurally elegant than either of those, and I want to name it precisely because the naming is the only thing that makes the next movement possible. You learned very early that your emotional perceptiveness was currency, not in a cynical way, not as manipulation, not as strategy. You did not decide to use it. It simply turned out in the environment where you developed that your ability to feel the room, to sense the shift, to know before anyone spoke what the emotional temperature required, this capacity produced results. It kept things from breaking apart. It kept people from disappearing into their worst states. It kept you from being caught off guard by what you had already quietly anticipated. And so it became the thing you were, not one quality among others, the organizing principle of the self. When identity is built this way around a capacity that was originally adaptive, originally necessary, originally the difference between safety and exposure. It does not remain merely a capacity, it becomes a moral framework. You are not simply someone who feels deeply, you are someone for whom feeling deeply is what it means to be a good person, to be real, to be the kind of presence that has value in the world. This is where the shadow work becomes structurally blocked, because if sensitivity is your moral framework, if feeling is what separates you from the people who cause harm, from the people who were cold to you, from the system that failed to protect you, then to discover that you also contain coldness, that you also contain the wish to not feel, that you also contain something hard and withholding and unwilling is not merely uncomfortable, it is a threat to the entire architecture. It does not feel like information, it feels like collapse, and so the psyche, being extraordinarily intelligent, finds a way to keep the architecture intact while appearing to do the work. You do shadow work on the acceptable parts of your shadow. You integrate your anger because anger, reframed as a healthy boundary, as a response to genuine violation, as the righteous heat of someone who was wronged, can be held inside the sensitivity framework without disturbing it. Anger on behalf of the wound is still, in some legible way, a form of feeling. It confirms the identity rather than threatening it. What cannot be integrated this way is the shadow that has nothing to do with what was done to you. The contempt that is simply contempt, the exhaustion that is not burnout in the sympathetic sense, but something closer to not caring, the part of you that looked at someone's pain and felt beneath the performed compassion, something that was frankly closer to boredom, the part that has calculated more than once whether a relationship was worth the emotional cost, not as a healthy assessment of your own needs, but as a cold arithmetic that surprised you with its precision. That shadow does not fit the framework, and so it does not get integrated. It gets managed, and managing is not the same as integrating. Managing means keeping the material in a state of controlled pressure, acknowledged enough that it does not erupt, suppressed enough that it does not have to be reckoned with. Management produces a particular kind of exhaustion that does not respond to rest, because what is draining is not the emotional labor itself. What is draining is the ongoing work of keeping a significant portion of your psychological life just out of view. I observed this in my practice with extraordinary consistency. The person who comes in thoroughly conversant in psychological language, who can name the complex, describe the projection, trace the family system with genuine insight, and who remains, despite all of this fluency, in a kind of low-grade suffering they cannot quite account for. They are doing the work, they understand the concepts, they have made real progress on the identifiable wounds, and yet something does not shift. Something stays. What stays is always the part they cannot afford to look at without the framework breaking. In your case, and I want to be careful here, because precision matters more than comfort, what stays is the recognition that your sensitivity has also been, at times, a form of control, not cruelty, not conscious manipulation, something more subtle and more difficult to sit with than either. When you are the person in the room who feels the most, who perceives the most, who carries the most. You are also, structurally, the person around whom others must modulate themselves, the one whose emotional state becomes the weather, the one whose perception, once it has been named aloud, tends to become the definitive reading of what is happening, the one who, by virtue of feeling everything, acquires a kind of interpretive authority that was never formally granted but rarely challenged. This is shadow, not the sensitivity itself. The sensitivity is real. The perception is real. The wound that produced the alertness is real. But wrapped inside the sensitivity, functioning beneath it, using it as cover, is a hunger for the authority that perception gives. A hunger for being the one who knows, for being the one whose version of events, whose reading of the room, whose emotional account is the true one. And the people who challenged that authority, who said, "You are not the only one who feels, you are not the only one who is hurt, your reading is not the only reading." Those people became, in your inner architecture, the ones who do not understand, the ones who cannot feel properly, the ones from whom you withdrew, or whom you categorized, or whose challenges you translated into evidence of their limitation rather than evidence that your own perception had edges.